episode 33 of the podcast. This week we're going to talk about heads, we're going to talk about faces, ears, noses, and lips. We're going to talk about the things that dogs need to know about, and we're going to talk about some strategies to teach them. This is the Creating Great Grooming Dogs podcast. I'm Chrissy Newmeyer-Smith. I'm a certified professional groomer, a certified behavior consultant for canines, and a certified professional dog trainer. And this, my friends and colleagues, is the podcast where grooming and training meet. Let's talk about working on dogs' heads. Let's talk about heads, faces, ears, noses, lips. One of the first things an owner will notice about a grooming is the dog's face. And for many owners, actually, the hair in front of their eyes is the signal that the dog needs to be groomed. Even if the dog doesn't need to be trimmed, you know what? The faces are the things that the owners will notice first, because a well-scrubbed, sweet-smelling nosy nose is the first thing they're going to notice when they go out and pick up their dog. So not only are groomers fixated on getting that face perfect, but the owners are fixated on having it be perfect. And so when we talk about having a safety policy, and if we have dogs who are nervous about things, one of the reasons why we want to have our expectations in line with that and to have owners know that we need them to be safe is for us to also to be able to say, your face might not be perfect either. I think a lot of people don't think about the biting end of their dog or all of the delicate little areas on the dog's face. So as a training goal, I want our training goal to be the 3 C's: comfortable, calm, and cooperative. And while we're working on their head, let's talk about what those particular challenges are with the head. So one of those particular challenges is direct and close eye contact. Right? A lot of dogs are uncomfortable with that, but that's something very easy for owners to be working on at home. And it's something that can help a lot for grooming, for vet visits. You think about, we're looking at their eyes, we're looking at their nose, we're pulling at their lips, and we're going to go into all those details. But even just being up close and looking in a dog's eye, for many dogs, is something they are not used to, except for the loving kind of sweet talking, baby talking with their owners, which is fine. I do it with my guys too. I hold their little noses and I do them how great they are and I just love them so much, right? But we can't just leave it at that. We also need to have owners start thinking, okay, now I'm going to look at your eyes and I'm going to look at your head and kind of examine your head and take a look. So even just direct eye contact. Now here's another one: touching and repositioning the head. Because we want to be able to touch them all over. We want to be able to put our hands on them and reposition them. And sometimes you need to lift a chin. Sometimes you need to put a head in a different angle to get inside the ear to really clean it out. Let me explain that better for those who don't know what I mean. But a dog that's extending their neck and has their head kind of pulled up in line with their neck instead of a more natural high neck with their head parallel to the floor, it's really hard to get into their ears if they're pulling their head up and pulling their head back or stretching their neck. So sometimes it's a matter of repositioning and like, okay, can I get you to pull your head back a little bit? Or you have them in the tub and you're trying to lower their nose so that they don't get water in their nose and water in their ears. Like, okay, I need to reposition your head. So repositioning a head and touching it all over, that's another one of the challenges. And it's also, like I said, something that owners can be working on while they're hanging out with their dog. Okay. Lifting and repositioning ears. That's a big one. Even dogs that don't get trimming, that we're lifting their ears, we're making sure they're clean, we're scrubbing, we're rinsing, we're scrubbing, we're rinsing, we're conditioning, we're drying, we're toweling. But when we get in there with cotton, but for the dogs that need to be trimmed, we're often adding clippers. We're doing some fine scissor work on the corners of ears, right there up against that delicate edge. For many breeds, we go right up next to that edge. I want you to think about the Schnauzer ear as a great example of an ear that we usually just take right along the edge, and it's very, very close to the skin. So we need them to be able to feel comfortable with us touching their ears. They need to be comfortable with us touching their mouth. Sometimes we're pulling on lips or putting fingers in their mouth to get that little bit of hair that they slurp into their mouth. And if you're not a groomer, you might not realize that dogs do that. But just trying to get that little bit of hair, thinking in particular of one particular Lhasa that I know that does it all the time. It's like, and that hair's in his mouth, and you're kind of getting your finger in, and you have to almost put your finger in between the teeth and the lip and pull and comb that hair out, and then get your scissors or your clippers and take that hair, all the while trying to keep them from licking you. And I think a lot of owners and trainers aren't necessarily thinking about those tiny, delicate areas and how we reach them. So as a trainer, I want you to think, wow, this is different than what I thought we were doing with heads. Like it's not just a scissors done, right? I wish it was. God, that'd be nice. But that sometimes we're reaching into their mouth. If you think about a poodle face, the classic poodle face that's been shaved, we actually put our finger in the corner of their mouth, in the very corner, and pull that skin nice and tight so that we can run the clipper over without nicking them, without getting into the fold. But that flews right there, that little fold in their bottom lip, it needs to be pulled tight and pulled straight and flat for us to get the clipper there and to get a really nice flush look. And it's pretty and it's important, but if we don't have a dog who's able to do that yet, we always need to be thinking about the behavior that we need, and that we're going to cut into that more. So that's one of the other skills that we have, is being able to put our fingers in their mouth and touch them and touch the hair on their lips and get them used to that. Get them used to that weird stuff. Because part of what dogs worry about is that stuff's kind of weird. So as owners, we need to be thinking, I need to be able to touch you anywhere, and make it so casual and normal. Not a training thing, not a drill where we say, "Oh, let's get out some cookies and let's get you on the grooming mat and get you all close," right? Like, just make it normal. I mean, you can also be intense. That's okay too. I do train my dogs also for the worried eye. Oh, let's take a look. I need them to be good for that too. But to have an idea that, oh, just touching lips. Don't let it be the first time he's ever had a finger in his mouth like that when he's at a groomer. So we're touching lips, we're repositioning ears. All right, here's another one. We're working at the corner of the eye and the eyelids. That's really tricky for a lot of dogs. That corner of the eye often has, for many dogs, there's some skin irritation there. Many dogs get eye goo, and the skin irritation there can make it really uncomfortable in general. One of the things I find owners do that make it worse, they don't mean to, but we can educate our owners about how to get that eye gunk out. One of the things that owners tend to do is they press it down into the skin and try to peel it out instead of picking at it upward. Or they're just too rough, or they hold the dog's mouth shut while accidentally pressing on their nose, and they're kind of suffocating their pet while they're doing it. Like the pet can't breathe, but they aren't thinking about that if you go along just like on your own nose. So unless you're driving or something, or you're grooming right now and can't touch your own nose, but touch your own nose and down the bridge of your nose, hard, and keep going toward the tip until you feel it go smush. And then you realize, okay, so if we're looking at a dog's muzzle, there's a point where there's hard, which is okay, and then we get that smush part. So if you're pressing entirely and an owner isn't thinking about what they're doing, they're often choking their dog out. So I find that a lot of owners, once we tell them that, they're like, oh, God. Then they go home and they're working on it, and their dog is entirely different the next time. So be thinking about the ways that we touch around the eyes and the tools that we have to use around the eyes, right? Corners of the eyes, the eyelids, those things are really small areas and really dangerous, right? Another one of the things about working on heads, we need them to hold still with a variety of tools, noises, and vibrations. And maybe not every dog needs all of those. And certainly while we're training, we're trying to keep them calm, comfortable, and cooperative. So we don't necessarily use every tool we have, but we want them to be able to eventually work up to the full variety of tools that we have available to us. So sometimes we just start off with, all right, you can't handle a clipper, sound or vibration near your face, so we will use scissors. But I want you to be thinking that's not necessarily the best tool for many dogs to get a full trim. So we need to be thinking about this when we're talking about training goals for working on heads. All right. Now also holding still while we focus on trims using our groomer eye. And what I mean by groomer eye is when we're in the zone and we're just thinking about hair. And I know I mentioned in a previous podcast that my animals, my own dogs in the past and the current ones and my last cats, they all noticed as soon as my gaze turned to hair. And not that that's particularly frightening or anything for them. They just notice it. They're like, hey, we want to play ball. Oh, she's looking at my hair, right? So that groomer eye is a little bit different. It's almost like someone's looking at you, but kind of through you, right? So imagine you're looking at a buddy, or if you work in a grooming shop, look at each other, but only look at like the corner of a lip. Think about how creepy it is, right? So we need our dogs to be used to, like, why is someone just staring at a middle of my forehead? Is there something there? Like, do I have something on my face? Why are you looking at me like that? So we look at dogs in a weird way. So that's one of the things that we can work on at home. Get them used to groomer eye. Get them used to having these things happen while we're using a groomer eye. Now, one of the things I want to mention too, while we're talking about working with heads, is the possible use of a muzzle. Because while I try to be very, very mindful when I'm talking to people about using muzzles, and I usually refer to them as the face mitten. It just takes a little bit of the sting out of it, right? But for some dogs, if they're really, really nervous and they have a history that comes with them of fighting back or having this big conflict, sometimes putting a muzzle on before they are upset and just totally gently handling them just as kind and gentle as you were before and taking it off without incident over and over again can be a big, big difference for them. Because not only are they muzzled, but now they're also in a situation where they realize that nothing bad happened. And for some dogs, I really feel, and this is a feeling, not kind of an intuitive hit. I can't really define it very well, but my intuitive hit is that for many dogs, when they realize we've taken away the ability to bite, they just focus in a little bit more on the sweet talk, right? They notice that we're being gentle and that we're trying. So be mindful of muzzle use, but if a muzzle needs to be used, it's not the end of the world, but it is part of teaching dogs to work around their head. For many dogs, it's going to be okay to use a muzzle. I have a couple of dogs that I'm never going to fully trust because of health issues with them, and they won't necessarily hold back if something happens, and they'll wear a muzzle. I do their face, and we put the muzzle on, and we're just as kind as gentle as before. And you know what? Those dogs don't fight me. They're okay. They're relaxed, but we have the extra security of knowing that if they were to turn, the most I'm going to get is a pinch, right? Maybe a bloody pinch, but it'll just be a pinch, because muzzles aren't 100%. They can still kind of nab you with some teeth, but it's different than a full-on bite. So another possible thing about working around heads is that if you are using treats, we want dogs to be able to take treats gently. Part of the reason why I'm worried about using treats in a grooming setting is because often there are other dogs around. Some dogs are very food aggressive. Some dogs are really weird about being fed near other dogs, especially dogs they don't know. Some dogs are very, very rough with food. Some dogs are overly excited with food. But if food is something you are using, you also need to make sure that they have very, very nice manners with their mouth for using food. Okay, so those are some of the things that we talk about when we're talking about doing stuff around their head. And that's some of the things that dogs need to know about to have their head worked on. Now, the groomer has a lot of skill here too, because this is an area where we're a millimeter from disaster, and a tiny bit off and a dog needs stitches, right? A little wiggle could be harmful, could hurt them. Right? So in the next part, we're going to talk more about how to work on these things and work on them all together in a way that's going to make sense for a dog. If you're enjoying my podcast, please remember to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. So to work on heads, I want you to think about starting with calm, maintaining calm, and then if you lose calm, return to calm. Right? This should always be totally relaxed, as with everything that we do. But since we're talking specifically about heads in this episode, we're going to talk about just the head. But it should be about as interesting as watching paint dry. And when I say that, I mean that we never reach a point where the dog is getting worried. I want you to let go of the need to get it all done in one sitting. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how I start at the beginning with a head so I don't wait till the end for a couple of reasons, and how we can help the dog get more repetitions, because we don't want to always like try to get it done all at once. And we want to work on heads when we have the dogs focused. And part of how we're going to be able to do that is to let go of the idea that it needs to be perfect. And our safety policy protects us from the stress of getting it done. Right? The telling people that if your dog is worried, if your dog is wiggly, if your dog is aggressive, we slow everything down. Your dog may not be perfect today, but this is for the long term so that we can have perfect in the future. If we already have that, then we don't have the internal stress of I've got to get it done. Or another one that I hear often is I would never let a dog go out of my shop looking like that or looking less than perfect. And we can let that go when we have explained a safety policy. Okay, perfect trims are for dogs who can handle the behavior part of grooming. All right, we need to be thinking about, especially around heads, that we want a perfect trim, but if we put in the hard work now and the prep work on teaching a dog to be good for it, we can have a lifetime of beautiful trims on their head. We can have a lifetime of that if we put in that time now. So how do I work on heads? What do I start with? And I start with the head on most dogs. Partly because when I started as a new groomer, I kind of needed a dog to wear it and then keep going back to tweak it because heads can be kind of tricky. So when I started learning how to groom, I found that, all right, I'm going to do the head and then I can go back to it as many times as I need to. You know, dog gives a shake or wiggles or whatever, or I run a comb through and go, oh, there's another sticky outie. You know, tech talk. So most groomers know what I mean by a sticky outie, but for those of you who don't, I'm sure you can imagine that, you know, you end up combing again and there's this one little hair that's a little bit longer, or one little edge that's uneven, or the right side looks a little longer than the left. So as a new groomer, I started doing heads first, and my instructor was awesome. That's exactly what she said. Then do the head first and get used to going back and circling back, and your skills will develop. But as a trainer, I start there to assess if the dog is going to need breaks and need help, because heads are one of the usual suspects, right? Like if you're going to ask somebody what their dog has a problem with, it's like nails, paws, bums, and faces, right? Ears, eyes, you know, the whole head. So it's one of the usual suspects. It's one of the first things I check on. Like, okay, well, let's see how you are for your head, right? So as a trainer, when I start there, what I'm looking for is how calm am I able to keep this dog, right? Calm, comfortable, and cooperative. And again, thinking about starting with calm, maintaining calm, and if you lose your calm, return to calm. So there's a whole lot of calm, a whole lot of relax. But if we're doing it right, they're learning that this is safe. And when we start at the very beginning of a grooming, working on heads, then we also get a chance to kind of play around with, okay, how are you if I turn on the clippers? Because I don't need to finish you in the next 10 minutes. Your mom is not coming to pick you up in 10 minutes, which in groomer speak means she should show up right now and start going, oh, and have them wiggle, right? So in groomer speak, we kind of know that close to when pickup time is the worst time to be trying to do anything very, very close to an eye or an ear. So if we think about starting with the face, then we can also work on how comfortable the dog is, what tools they're comfortable with. And I want you to think about, we're going to work a little bit and then give breaks and move on to something the dog finds easy, and work a little bit and give breaks and work a little bit and give breaks. And those breaks in a grooming shop could be, okay, and I totally disengage from you and put you in a crate and you get a real break. As a house call groomer, that break for me is I move on to an area that you find easy. And that's part of why I get my hands all over that dog in the beginning. I want to see how they are for their face. Now, one little trick I can tell you is that for many, many dogs, they're actually going to put up with a little bit more scissoring around their face while they're wet in the tub. I don't know why, but it does seem to be true. And actually, while they're wet in the tub, I usually will try to get any sort of eye gunk or, leftover food in their beard or whatever. I try to get that stuff out in the tub. I usually don't use clippers for that. And I remember one particular job where that was a big argument between me and the brusher bather constantly. It's like, but that needs to be soaked and cleaned off. And they're like, oh, it's just going to get trimmed off anyway. And it was this constant battle. But trimming that off can cause some skin irritation. So we want to have that, like, kind of take care of that in the tub. But there are plenty of dogs that I'll go through with a comb and just a little tiny pair of scissors next to the eyes. Those little tiny ball tip scissors that can get in really, really close and try to do it in the tub. For whatever reason, for some dogs, that is much more relaxing for them. And then over time, because it never turns into a fight, because we're being totally relaxed, because we're being calm with them and giving them breaks, over time, they become really okay with lots of the things we need to do. So I want the dog to find this to be easy. I want them to think this isn't a big deal. So when I say we work a bit, that's very specific to the animal we're working with at that moment. So if they start being relaxed, that might be when I stop. I don't necessarily want them to start getting wiggly. If I'm working with a dog and I notice that they just totally took a nice big exhale, I might stop there instead of, okay, now let's get your other eye. I kind of don't care if I get both eyes. I kind of don't care if I get both ears in the same exact moment because I can move around. And by doing a head first, we can circle back more and more times. Now, I want you to think, too, we all learn by repetition. That's how we all learn stuff. That's how we learn pretty much anything. I remember being a little kid and trying to memorize spelling words, right? Memorizing multiplication tables. We learn by repetition. If I pick up a musical instrument and I'm learning a new song, I have to learn by repetition. And that might be learning measure by measure. And if you're not a music person, that's like doot, 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 doot. Like just a couple of notes, doot, 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 doot. And you learn that one and then doot, 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 doot. And then you start chaining them together, right? So there are lots of things that we learn in tiny bits. And when we circle back and do a little bit more around an eye and circle back and do a little bit more around an ear and circle back and maybe introduce the clippers, even if we've already trimmed it with scissors, and then circle back and, put a finger in their mouth and then circle back, right? We're getting in all of those repetitions and we're getting in a lot of really good repetitions because the dog is never reaching the point where they're struggling. They're not reaching the point where they're scared. And even if we push them a little bit too far, if we lose that calm, we're going to calm them down again. Like, hey, buddy. Because again, we're starting off with the stuff that they find difficult and then circling back a bunch so that we don't feel like I've got to get this done. And again, our safety policy helps reduce our stress of getting it done. Our owners are already on board with it. And if they're not, their dog should be prepared for grooming, right? We don't need to put up with dogs that aren't going to be worked on or worked with, or owners who are going to demand perfection on a dog that cannot handle it. We need to put in this investment of time. Now, one of the ways that I describe this to my owners is that because I think we all come from different backgrounds, so I try to come up with as many different versions as I can. But one of the ways I describe this to my owners is this kind of background work and helping them be comfortable with it leads to perfection later. It's like putting up drywall the right way the first time and then putting a nice paint job on it. Because if the drywall isn't up right, and it's not even, and there's anything wrong with it, that paint job is just going to show it, right? Or you didn't use tape on the edges and your paint job bled off to the sides or on a little bit on the floor, right? You think about the prep work for painting a wall or the prep work for putting up a wall. You think about the prep work for learning a song on a musical instrument. You think about the prep work for learning how to play baseball, for example. So t-ball is an example of little kids learning each individual piece before they can really play the game. But they're learning the game. Sometimes we just need more repetitions, and that repetition is really important. Now, as groomers, we spend a lot of time learning scissoring. Hand scissoring is tricky, and I don't know about you guys, but one of the things I was taught and I circle back to once in a while when I think my skills need to be worked on is just having the scissors in my hand and just practicing kind of going over the edges while I'm watching TV. So I'm like over here, over at the edge of the couch, over at the edge of the coffee table, like scissoring along the edge of a glass. It sounds so stupid, but it's practicing the very precise right next to it. As a trainer, we often work on things like our timing, like see it, click, treat if you're a clicker trainer, or watching video and being like reward there, reward there, reward there, or watching videos of yourself saying, that was the moment. That was the moment. Or watching a video of your dog and realizing that was the moment he caught scent or noticed something, or his ear flicked and it was before the bark happened that you realize, he has noticed that dog, and in the moment I didn't see it there. So there are lots of ways that we all work on little tiny, tiny details to build our skills. And in the dog world, and in the grooming world, especially when we're working around heads, we can get all of those little repetitions in one grooming. And then the second grooming, we get more repetitions in. And when I am grooming a dog, my goal is to see improvement during that grooming session. So one of the things I hear groomers talking about is, and he did much, much better today, and he did much better the next time, and he did much better the next time, and that's awesome. That's good. That means you're making progress. But I also want you to think he did better after the bath, right? Or he did better when I went to his right eye, or when I circled back and did his left eye again, just for the repetition. Even if the left eye was already done, if I circle back to the left eye again and he's fine. Or if I go and do nails, certainly this is the episode about heads, but if I go back and do the nails and just take the grinder to them again a second time and the dog is like, whew, yeah, okay, right? That's the kind of progress I want you to see during a grooming, during that session, to feel that sense of, this dog is learning right here, right now. And we can get a lot of repetitions in one session, sort of like taking a private lesson with anybody for anything, right? If I took a private lesson for flute, I learn a lot faster than if I'm just on my own trying it, right? Because I get lots of repetition and someone right beside me saying, try it again, try it again, try it again. So when we're working with our dogs, if we're thinking, all right, let's try it again, let's try it again, let's try it again, we already have a safety policy. We've explained to owners that it might not be perfect. Okay, so what I would like you guys to do as your weekly action step, because I love these weekly action steps. I don't know if you guys are doing them. I'm doing them, and it's just building my skill set all over again, adding more practice. What I want you to do for your weekly action step is I would like for you to start with a head and just circle around and just keep coming back to it and keep coming back to it and let go of the idea of getting it perfect and let go of the idea of fighting with it and let go of the idea of doing anything in particular to any sort of completion in the beginning of that grooming session. And that's gonna give you the chance to watch for behavior and focus on behavior. And by the end of that grooming session, those multiple repetitions, you might be very surprised at how relaxed the dog can now be for things that you want to do when you want to be very precise. If you are a trainer, I want you to think about whatever dog you're working with, whether it be your own dog, but just kind of or an owner, if just kind of get used to, okay, I'm going to hold my dog and I'm going to reposition his head. I'm going to put his head back. I'm going to put his head forward. I'm going to go ahead and pull at his lip and take a look. I'm going to lift up his lip. I'm going to tickle his nose. I'm going to feel for like where his eyebrows are and think about combing forward and combing back and combing up on the cheeks and combing down on the cheeks and twisting his ears around a little bit. And, I want you to be thinking about the various things that we do as groomers. And trainers, it would be great if you went onto YouTube and looked up Groomer TV. I know I've mentioned it before, but Groomer TV is a Barkley production. What they do is they they post videos of things that happen at conferences, and they're meant to be for groomers, but as trainers you can watch how groomers handle dogs while they're talking about how to do a lovely Westie head, or how they're talking about how to do, the perfect top knot for a poodle. And you can get a chance to watch and observe what groomers are doing when they're not thinking about the behavior of the dog, because these dogs are already well trained for it. So I hope this is helpful for you guys. Have a great week and stay curious. If you'd like to talk to me, you can find me through my grooming and training business, happycrittersdogtraining.com, my email, chrissy@happycritters.net, and through the Creating Great Grooming Dogs Facebook page. And we have these awesome devices in our pockets that allow us to do live video with each other. I can help you with the dog on your table. We can set up live lessons, and you may be surprised at how much we can get accomplished together via video. I'm also happy to come to you if you're near my area in southern New Hampshire. If you're ready to go beyond the podcast, and I hope you do, I've made it really easy for you. If you go to creatinggreatgroomingdogs.com and click on your next step, you'll see all of the options. There's the Scholar Lounge community, there's the Modern Grooming Professional Certification, there's Master Canine Stylist and Professional Canine Stylist Diploma testings, there's the Behavior Lab for coaching and private one-on-one sessions with me, and of course the Master Groomer Behavior Specialist program. So go to creatinggreatgroomingdogs.com and click on your next step.